know a thing or two about Disney World, but we're in uncharted waters with all the new policy updates and changes that came with the park reopenings. Even the pros can be surprised by Disney, and we sure experienced a bit of the unexpected. It's AJ for Disney Food Blog. Okay, even with all of our super thorough research based on how other parks handled reopenings, including Disney's parks in Shanghai and Hong Kong, Disney still surprised us with their procedures during reopening. So let's take a look at the things we got completely wrong and why you might want to stay flexible if you've got an upcoming Disney trip. First up, we totally didn't understand how temperature screenings were going to work. We knew temp screenings would likely be coming to the US Disney parks when we first saw them in action during the reopening of Shanghai Disney back in May. We just didn't know how different they would be in the States. While Shanghai sends guests through temperature screening tents with thermal cameras, Disney, as well as Universal, are using handheld touchless thermometers aimed at the forehead. We figured they'd just do what Shanghai did, because it's easy and it seems to make sense. Now, temperature checks are a mandatory step to entering Disney Springs and Disney World parks, and now Disney's made it a requirement for anyone dining at a table service restaurant within a Disney resort to have a temperature check. All guests and cast members must have their temp checked, and it must be below 100.4 degrees for them to enter any location at Disney World that is requiring those checks. Safe to say you will be getting your temperature scanned many times throughout your trip to Disney. And honestly, it's kind of a peace of mind thing, because if you get your temperature scanned and you're okay, then that means you're probably okay. So it's kind of nice to get my temperature taken multiple times. But originally, like I said, we thought this added layer to the security entrance process could cause line backups. But in practice, we haven't had any trouble getting through temperature screenings quickly and easily. The process couldn't be simpler, and transportation lines have been a way bigger headache than entering the park on most days, probably because of that limited capacity. People are going through the temp checks pretty quickly. Now, since it's very hot out in Florida right now, most days in the summer have a heat index over 100 degrees. There are cool down tents located by the temperature screening areas in case you need a moment in the shade. We also weren't too sure who would be conducting temperature checks. Now, many believed cast members would be the ones responsible for checking temperatures, but Disney is using Advent Health to handle all of their screenings right now. If temperature checks become a consistent thing, I am hoping they switch to those thermal cameras, because those are super, super easy. When I went to that character meal at Four Seasons, they had a thermal camera, and it was just like you didn't even notice anything happened. And there wasn't any sort of social distancing issue either, where someone had to get close to you to take your temperature. So fingers crossed they actually switch to those thermal cameras at some point. Okay, next thing we got wrong about the Disney World reopening: character interactions. Shortly after Disney World announced their reopening dates, they also announced that they would temporarily suspend parades, fireworks displays, and character meet and greets upon reopening. Shanghai and Hong Kong had canceled fireworks shows and character meet and greets, but several stage shows with characters were running when the parks reopened, and character meals were still a go. Now, we weren't quite sure what to expect in Disney World, and we were a little surprised when they announced character meals wouldn't be happening, because they were happening in the other parks that were already open. And then we were confused when Topolino's Terrace was announced as opening with a modified character meal. So Disney says no character meals, and then all of a sudden they have a character meal. Now, you're still going to see Mickey and friends, but they won't get close to your table. They're just kind of traversing around the restaurant and dancing and, posing for socially distanced selfies with people. But they don't tend to stop very often, and they definitely don't stop at each table. Now, Garden Grill has also returned with a similarly socially distant character experience. Now, you won't get a Mickey hug with your Mickey waffles, but you will get a wave. We got another big surprise on opening day of Disney Springs when we found stormtroopers patrolling from up above on a balcony. Disney World's been pretty inventive with the ways we're seeing characters now that the parks are opened, and it's really not something that we would have anticipated. You'll see many characters in the cavalcades that come through all of the parks. Probably the most surprising with those is that the princesses aren't wearing masks. There are plenty of masked cast members to make sure everyone is kept at a safe distance, but the princesses themselves are not wearing masks, and the characters themselves are not wearing masks in the cavalcades. Now, you definitely want to keep an eye out for those surprise character interactions that are in some honestly bizarre places. It seems like the weirder the place, the more fun the interaction. Cinderella's stepsisters can be found hanging out on the balcony at the back of the castle, and while you might have to shout for them to hear you, they are very, very funny to chat with. And you might spot Winnie the Pooh or Joy just frolicking around in a field in Epcot. And also, don't forget, the Beast has now come out for lunch at Be Our Guest restaurant. Before, he was only at dinner, and we really didn't think he'd be back even for dinner, but he's there for lunch and dinner now, although you can't meet and greet him. He's just walking around the restaurant. So we weren't really sure how they were going to do characters at all, much less character meals, but turns out you can actually see characters quite a bit, probably even more than you saw them before. All right, next thing we got completely wrong about the Disney World reopening: what merchandise would sell out and what wouldn't. We weren't sure how Disney would be handling big merchandise releases, and honestly, we didn't expect to see some of the most in-demand collections for sale on day one of the reopening of World of Disney and Disney Springs. The mini main attraction collections were available in store that first day and resulted in hours-long virtual queues to get in just to shop. That merchandise was sold out well before we got into the store 3 hours after opening. Disney quickly changed their minds based on all of that, and for the time being at least, they will not be releasing limited edition merchandise in their stores. That being said, it looks like people don't need a limited edition collection to cause a huge line. Splash Mountain merchandise is a hot commodity in Magic Kingdom now that the ride will be rethemed to Princess and the Frog. So there's no time frame on that change, and it's very likely that a few more shipments of Splash Mountain merchandise will make their way to the store, but there were still hours-long virtual lines at Magic Kingdom the first few days to get that Splash merchandise. Now, we were expecting new park necessities like masks and hand sanitizer to be the first things to sell out, but it seems that once Disney got their masks in stock, they're doing a good job of keeping it that way. We've also seen plenty of hand sanitizer popping up in stores around Disney World with a limit of 3 per customer, and there seems to be enough to go around. All right, another thing we got completely wrong about the Disney World reopening: refilling our popcorn buckets and mugs. We definitely did not expect to get our popcorn buckets refilled, or at least not without a whole bunch of glove changes and scoop sanitizing. Same thing for the refillable mug program. With the temporary cancellation of all Disney dining plans, which include a refillable mug, we kind of thought refillable things might also be nixed for the time being, but we were wrong. On our first visit to Disney Springs, we were able to get our refillable bucket filled just like before. The cast member just loaded it up with popcorn and wiped on the handle before giving it back to us. But by the time Magic Kingdom opened, that protocol had changed. We showed the cast member our refillable bucket and received a popcorn carton at the $2 refill price. As for those refillable mugs, you can definitely still get the free drinks that come with the mug purchase, but cast members will be working the soda fountain for you. So just like the popcorn bucket, you'll get a disposable cup of your beverage of choice, and then you can decide which container you'd like to use. Another thing we got completely wrong about the Disney World reopening: that so many hotels would not have opened yet. And that Disney would be covering costs to move people. So we expected that shows, restaurants, and hotels might not all be available when Disney reopened, but with so many guests already booked at so many different hotels, we didn't quite expect Disney World to leave so many of them closed for so long. There were a few resorts, Port Orleans, the All-Stars, and Wilderness Lodge, that hadn't received opening dates when the rest of the resorts' openings were announced and still haven't. But now Disney's pushed the openings of several more resorts. So Polynesian Village Resort was set to open on August 12th and is now opening October 4th. Art of Animation was set to open August 12th and will now be opening November 1st. Disney's Beach Club Resort was set to open August 24th and is now closed until further notice. And Boardwalk Inn was set to open October 1st and will now be closed until further notice as well. So that's a lot of Disney hotels and a lot of hotel rooms that Disney's not even opening to guests at all. And with lower attendance, this move certainly makes sense, but what we weren't expecting was that Disney would cover the cost of moving guests to a different resort if their resort is now closed. Earlier on in the trip rescheduling process, guests affected by the park closings had to pay the difference in room price in most instances. Again, this is not something that Disney ever stated. So some guests had Disney pay the difference and some had to pay their own difference. Disney never actually had a policy on it. And all of that is anecdotal, by the way. But now, in addition to waiving change and cancellation fees, Disney has stated they would cover the cost of room changes if the new room is more expensive than the one guests were originally staying in. So Disney trip modifications are being handled on a case-by-case basis, it seems. Don't expect major room upgrades across the board, but speak with a cast member to find out what your options are, and they should be able to help you find something you're happy with. So even with exhaustive research and all the data we can find, Disney has still thrown us a few curveballs and continues to throw us even more. As things change, Disney has consistently been updating their policies surrounding what counts as a mask and when you can remove them, and what hotels are opening when. Things can change at any time and will change if circumstances require, so it's super important to stay on top of all of Disney's policies leading up to your trip. You don't want to be stuck with an unapproved mask or a hotel that isn't opening. Stay tuned. We're going to report Disney's official word, and of course, we're going to give you all of the data, research, and explanations we can for the questions that you have. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for watching. And thank you for sending us your questions. We love to get the emails and direct messages from you guys with your questions because it helps us to figure out what we need to research, what questions we need to ask Disney, and what we need to do to figure out answers for you. So it's always good to know what you're most concerned about so that we can prioritize those things and make sure that we get answers for you. As always, this is AJ for Disney Food Blog, and we'll see you real soon.